people obviously normally most people would try and be in the office and teams can work together.
Yeah.
I was just wondering whether that way, whether you think that's going to be an impact on the success of application security and customers.
Yeah, I mean, so I found that AppSec teams are generally really well positioned to work from home. However, there's sort of a cultural aspect of AppSec that's really important, that's difficult to do if you're just working remote. Like, you can't go and sit down with the developers and show that you appreciate them and understand code and sit side by side with them and help them work through stuff. So I feel like it's really incumbent on application security teams to go the extra mile and kind of reach out to development and make sure they know you've got their back. Because it often, if you're just flinging vulnerabilities over the fence at development teams, it may not be received the way you intended.
Sure. And I guess following from that, have you seen a change in any attacks into maybe the RASP platform, or have attacks increased over I guess it's over 4 months now probably, but as the landscape changed out there for the threats to applications?
Yeah, we actually just published. Let me see if I can find it here. I had it up earlier. We just published our bi-monthly report on, I don't think I have it open here anymore, and I don't want to go rooting around through my desktop while I find it. Sorry. So we just published a report. You can find it on the website under our research team, Contrast Labs. And they study the application vulnerability space, the library vulnerability space, and the attack space every couple months. We look at our data. And so I think in the last couple months, we've seen a pretty dramatic increase in attacks. I think they went from roughly 15,000 attacks per month per app up to about 20,000 attacks per month per app. So it's a noticeable change, and that's across tens of thousands of applications. So we feel like we got a pretty good sample there. And the nature of the attacks is kind of interesting. I'll dig into this a little bit in the talk, but we've seen increases in attacks on expression language injection. The kind of flaw that caused the Equifax breach. But there's a number of different vulnerabilities out there, and people are definitely scanning for it. So you want to be aware of that for sure.
Cool. And the increase in traffic at the minute is that causing an issue at all, do you think?
Oh, you mean just the raw bandwidth?
Yeah, obviously most retail shops haven't been open for a while, so I think we saw something in the UK. I think something like 70, it was either 71% or 72% of spend in April, I think it was online in the UK. Whether that, yeah, so was just wondering whether the change in how customers are using applications on the flip side of this, if you see any kind of issues coming through there as well.
I don't think we've seen the issues there yet. There's a lag time, but what we have seen is a dramatic increase in sort of digital transformation efforts across a lot of different industries. So, I think there's always a good chance that you're going to introduce security vulnerabilities, particularly when you're kind of rushing to put things online that weren't online before. Yeah. And so, dealing with that rush of new code is certainly overwhelming for application security teams that are already pretty well overloaded. Yeah. So I have serious concerns about our ability to deal with that as a world, because we're introducing code much faster than we can secure it. So that's
yeah, and I guess
about some techniques for dealing with that.
Yeah, and I guess it's going to be more and more prevalent now when our government, the UK government, rushed an application to out into the public and then defaulted back to Google and Apple very recently. So I guess every business and every organization right now is looking to push as much traffic, much business, much of everything they do really towards applications. So with that, I'd love to hand over to you and if you just want to give a brief introduction of yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks. So again, my name's Jeff Williams, and I'm super excited to talk to you today about the magic of security instrumentation. Currently, I'm the co-founder and CTO of Contrast Security. In the past, I ran a security consulting company for many years and worked with many large firms on their applications. I also helped to start OWASP, and I was a global chair of OWASP for the first 10 years. And I wrote a number of different open source projects like the OWASP 10 and ISAPI and WebGoat and a number of other things. So Contrast, we offer a DevSecOps platform that covers vulnerabilities and library analysis and runtime protection. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm talking about using instrumentation. And I just thought, on a personal note, I'm home here in Maryland, just north of Washington, D.C., with my wife and 3 of my 4 kids. I wish we could have met face to face. But the next best thing is if you guys ask a bunch of questions. So I'd love it if you think up questions, ask them in the chat. If it comes to you later, you can reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is Planet Level, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to get back to you. But it does make it a lot more fun if people ask questions. So I'll try and answer everyone. So I wanted to start with a picture of what we see today. And this is from one of our recent reports. Here you can see the likelihood of different classes of vulnerabilities compared to the likelihood of an attack on those vulnerabilities. And I think it's interesting. Some of these vulnerabilities get correspondingly high levels of attack. But other ones, in fact, ones that you might really think are more dangerous, things like command injection and expression language injection, those are pretty rare vulnerabilities, but they're getting a disproportionately large percentage of the attacks. And command injection sort of makes sense because it's devastating if you find one. But they really, the likelihood of finding one is really pretty minimal these days. People don't invoke the operating system in web apps and web APIs very much anymore. So I think this is an interesting view, and hopefully this can help you drive some of your priorities. I think if you think about access control, it's a pretty dangerous area, and it's very difficult to test. So I want you to, consider that this is one of your biggest risk exposures and probably one that's missed by testing very frequently. So on the vulnerability side, 96% of apps have at least one vulnerability. The average app has over 30. That's kind of crazy. Imagine if we were building airplanes and every time you did a safety check on a plane, you discovered 30 serious safety violations. I mean, nobody would fly. But even though these apps are really critical, people are trusting their finances, their healthcare, their social life, their kids, everything is getting put into apps. They're super critical, but we're really not doing a very good job at keeping them secure. So I imagine a world that's very different, where the average application doesn't have a vulnerability in it. And I think we can get there, but we've got to change some things. You should also know that the average application has just over 2 higher critical flaws in the libraries they use. I always say, like, if you're building a car, you don't want to use components that have known safety problems. And here, people are building apps and we're including libraries that have known security flaws. That's kind of crazy. So you need to get on top of that as a program. On the attack side, a little bit different stats up here. You can see the average application is attacked over 13,000 times a month. And I should update the slide. The latest one is more like 20,000 times a month. I think it's interesting that 0 applications were not attacked in every single month. So across, tens of thousands of applications that we monitor, there's 0 of them were not attacked at all, which is pretty concerning. Okay, so that's some of the stats that are out there. I want to take a broad look at kind of what we've tried over the years. And I feel like I've tried everything. I was involved in a lot of these efforts along the way. And I feel like none of this really made much difference. It's a lot of well-intentioned effort, but I think basically we haven't made really any progress. And by the way, the average number of vulnerabilities per app in 2002 was roughly 30. So we haven't really gotten better. And what's worse is they're the same vulnerabilities. I wrote the OWASP Top 10 in 2002, and it's the same stuff: injection, cross-site scripting, all the access control, authentication, encryption. It's all the same problems. So while I think a lot of smart people have put a lot of work into this, we're not really doing anything much better than we were. We're not going to train our way out of this. We're not going to hack our way out of this. We've got to think of something significantly different. And I wanted to zoom out and talk about the goal here for a second. To me, the goal is pretty simple. Every company wants to deliver value to customers faster. That's the digital transformation efforts that we're talking about. And we see all of our customers are doing this, and they're getting massive benefit out of it. They all have initiatives to do security modernization and digital transformation and move to the cloud and so on. And development has really responded here. I think DevOps has been transformational in the way people build software. Remember, software used to be kind of slow and really buggy, and you get long feedback loops, and DevOps has really transformed that. They've also taken advantage of a lot of services and components that are out there that'll make development much less risky by moving to cloud and containers and using open source components and CI/CD pipelines. We've transformed software development and gotten rid of a lot of the manual processes that were causing problems. Ultimately, it's paid off massively. Lots more frequent deploys, significantly faster recovery rates, less change failure rate. So just, really dramatic changes, but security still has kind of the same problems. And if you think about security, really, it's very similar problems to what software development had 10 years ago. Security is often late, it's slow, it's got tons of false positives and tons of false negatives. It's not very well automated. And that's what we got to change, because as software increases, security has to keep up. And there's no possible way with the number of security experts on the planet that we can bridge that gap. The economics are impossible. And so we've got to find some way to scale application security better. Many organizations respond to this challenge by saying, well, we'll buy some more tools and we'll shift left and we'll dump those tools on development teams and we'll add experts. Unfortunately, what they're really doing is adding complexity and friction to the process. We can't use the old way and just say, let's do it harder, because the math just doesn't work out. We got to get rid of that complexity and friction so we can deliver software to customers faster. What we see is if you try this legacy approach and you try to double down on it, what will happen is security slows down the value delivery stream. So development will either bypass it and release insecure code, or they'll run security asynchronously to the SDLC as a sort of compliance check. And neither of those are really good solutions. I believe modern security can be more. Why can't we do 200 times more frequent analysis if we automate it right? Why can't we get much faster and better remediation rates? Why can't we get dramatically lower security backlogs and handle producing 10x the amount of secure code? I think we can. We've got to change the way we think. And I want to just spend a minute on DevSecOps. There's some arguments about that term, but I don't care. I think it's useful to have a way of talking about what are the security aspects of DevOps. And I want to make it really clear, DevSecOps to me is about changing the way we do security. It's not about changing DevOps. We're not saying that DevOps doesn't already have security in it. We're not trying to shove security into DevOps, really we're talking about changing changing security so that it works more like DevOps. And I think if you haven't read the Phoenix Project, you should. If you do, really focus in on the 3 ways of DevOps. And you can see them listed here. It's about creating flow, ensuring instant feedback, and creating a culture of experimentation and learning. DevSecOps should follow that roadmap to the letter. We should establish security workflow. That means breaking security tasks down into little pieces that development teams can execute on using their normal machinery. So, we don't have to do a gigantic security test all at once. We should break it down into little pieces and deliver that value over time as part of the pipeline. We can get security work flowing and automated. We should also ensure instant security feedback so that when we discover a vulnerability, it's not a week or a month or a year later to notify the folks that made the mistake and can fix it. We need that to be almost instant. And then we also need to encourage that security culture. We can't continue to have the culture of security ruling with an iron fist and forcing development teams to do things. We have to work together with development to help produce value at speed without disrupting things. So I think, this is the roadmap to follow to get really great security in, across an enterprise. All right, let's shift gears here for a second. I want to talk about instrumentation. Then I'm going to come back, I'm going to put it all together. So instrumentation is really powerful, and it's not just about software. We're going to talk about software instrumentation, but instrumentation is just adding sensors to stuff, measuring what's going on, and collecting that data, and then doing analytics on that data to get really great feedback. So this is the 9450 instrumented basketball. I bought one a couple of years ago. It's amazing. It's got sensors inside it that measure how fast you dribble, the arc of your shot, makes and misses, it gives you a bunch of drills and stuff. It's really cool. And the data from the sensors goes to an app on your phone where it can give you instant feedback on how well you're doing and what you should work on. Now, I've been playing basketball for a long time, 40 years. And I started using this thing in within an hour, it told me I was shooting too flat, like I didn't have enough arc. And I made an adjustment and it helped. So I'm totally sold on this, but I want you to think bigger picture here. Instrumentation changes the game a little bit. Imagine that all kids have an instrumented basketball. They don't necessarily need a coach right there with them all the time. They can work on drills and do a bunch of this stuff themselves. So it changes the relationship between the expert coach and all the players out there. Now think about it for healthcare. Probably a lot of you are wearing a smartwatch or have a cell phone with you. Those devices are sensors and they can instrument you. My daughter, she has a tachycardia situation in her heart. And occasionally, she's a competitive swimmer, but occasionally her heart just goes crazy. And we would, she'd have a attack. We would rush her to the doctor, but by the time we got her there, it was over. And they were like, well, we got to measure it when it's happening. So, after 3 or 4 times, we got really frustrated. We ended up buying a device that she could put her thumbs on and measure her heart rate while the attack was happening. That was super powerful. And it helped doctors diagnose her and got it fixed. So again, we can change the relationship between doctor and patient. Imagine instead of going to the doctor once a year for a checkup, imagine you've got sensors that are monitoring you throughout the whole year. And the doctor is watching that data and he can get alerts if there's a situation, he can dig in, and that's when you have a conversation with the doctor. It changes, and we've got exactly this problem in security. There's not nearly enough experts to help all the developers in the world. There's like 30 million developers in the world. There's nowhere near that number of security experts. So we need a force multiplier, and I believe instrumentation is the key. So the good news is instrumenting software is easy. It's amazingly powerful. And from the moment I discovered this, it's almost 10 years ago now, I love this. So here's how it works in most platforms. You can do this in Java has the Java Instrumentation API, .NET has a Profiler API. Other languages have similar constructs, but the idea here is as you load the code from disk into memory where it actually runs, you get an opportunity to instrument that code. Basically, you can add some sensors in. So you just need to say where to put the sensor and then what data you want to gather from that sensor. And then the instrumented code looks exactly like that's the way the developer wrote it. And then it just runs like that. So these sensors are incredibly fast because they're built right into the application as though the developer coded them. And they can provide you really direct measurements of what's going on inside an application. And the way I kind of think about it is like, imagine you had an engine that you wanted to test in the real world. You might use electrical probes, like you might stick them into the engine and measure some voltage on something. Or imagine you're testing a circuit board and you've got like electrical probes that you put on it to monitor it as it runs. Same thing here. We're just doing it with software and we're inserting probes into this application so that we can see what's going on inside as it runs. So I don't like to show code during presentations, and I apologize if you're not a developer, but really the message I'm trying to get across here is that this is not complicated. This is an entire instrumentation agent for a Java application. And all this thing says is, I'm using this library called ByteBuddy, which is really cool and powerful. There's a number of different ones out there. But all this says is, I want to put a sensor into the Java SQL statement class in either the execute or execute query methods. Those are the unsafe query methods that might lead to a SQL injection. And I want to instrument those with this sensor called security advice. The security advice is right here. And all it does is it grabs the first parameter, the actual query, prints it out, and then prints a stack trace. So this is really simple, but this is kind of like the hello world for security instrumentation. And I just want to give you a sense of just what this happens. And so let's take a look at this. I have this, this set up here, so I'm going to actually demonstrate it. So the first thing we have to do is we have to tell Java to use this agent that we just built. So this is the code of that agent that we just created. And I'm setting this Java agent flag, which is the standard JVM flag for using the instrumentation API. So once I do this, now when I run this application, you'll see it says the unsafe SQL agent is installed here. And we can just use this application normally. So I'm just going to go to, oh dear, hold on a second. I need to, I had another app running here. So let me do that again. So I'm going to run this application. I've got the instrumentation agent going now, and I'm going to browse to something with a query in it. We'll just go to this check method here. This is a little app called Ticketbook. It's open source. You can download it and take a look, but I'll put, I'll put London here. And you can see our agent fired, and it just shows me the actual query from inside the application. I can see, London is what I typed in, and I can see the full stack trace, so I can see exactly the path towards invoking this code. So this is actually kind of powerful. It's a very surgical way of inserting a sensor exactly where I want to put it. I didn't need to have any code changes to the Ticketbook application. And it doesn't require any experts involved. But imagine if you push this agent out across an application portfolio and all of your applications started telling you where they're using queries that might be susceptible to SQL injection. Could be really powerful. You could get an immense amount of data quickly, and maybe you start an initiative to stamp out the use of unsafe SQL queries. So this is just the very simplest example of using instrumentation. I'll do a few more so you'll get a better sense of what you can accomplish here. So this is, I have slides in here. I'll provide the slides after the talk, so if anybody wants to look at this stuff, you can see exactly how I did it. You can also, by the way, instead of just logging that exception stack trace, you could actually throw the exception. And if you give that agent to developers, then as they're doing their normal development, imagine they use an unsafe query, then they test the code, it's gonna fire an exception. You'll either fail a test case, or you'll the application will break, and the developer will say, oh yeah, you're right, I gotta use the safe query. So it's a very fast way of potentially notifying developers that they've done something wrong without having to have them run a scan or anything. You're actually delivering security as code right to the people that need it through the tools that they're already using. So this is a really powerful way of working with development. I just want you to think about, sort of a typical scanning approach. Typically the scanner has to be an expert. They have to simulate attacks and send them into an application. And then all they get back is an HTTP response that they have to interpret. So this has a lot of problems with scale, speed, and accuracy. But now imagine this agent testing based approach, where here the experts are creating rules. They're creating these instrumentation sensors to add to the application. And I like thinking of it as like having a buddy inside the application that's watching everything that goes on. And then the developer just uses the application normally. You don't need a special security scanner. They just use the application normally. And what comes back is really detailed, exact line of code, the full query. You could capture the HTTP request. You can see the whole control flow, data flow, libraries, configuration, whatever you want to know about this application, you can create a sensor to gather that and provide it as part of the feedback. So again, it's a really powerful way of doing security testing. Let's take another look. I want to focus on a different way of making agents. This is based on a project that I'm starting called the Java Sensor Toolkit. And if you want to build your own agents, you could use the Java Sensor Toolkit. It's driven by this YAML file here. And you can see this is basically the exact same rule that we just looked at. Here, we're instrumenting the statement.execute methods, and we're generating a report. You can see the report here is a little more detailed. It shows every query, every unsafe query, gives you the query statement itself, shows you the exact code that it's in, and gives you the exact line of code that it's on. So you've got a good way of tracking this down. So this is much more scalable sort of approach. And this, what I'm trying to do, and by the way, I'm going to open source this project very shortly. It's not available yet. So if anybody out there wants to help me with this, I've got a little bit of finishing work to get this done. But the idea is anybody could define their own agent and very quickly create visibility into their applications at runtime. So let's do another demonstration of what you can really do with this. This sensor I'm gonna demonstrate explores access control. And I want you to see here that what we're doing is we're getting user identities. We're also getting the role. Anytime any application checks for access, like this is user and role is sort of a standard Java EE access control check. We're going to check that, and then we're going to create some reports on it. So let's give that one a try. So I'm going to kill that. I'm going to go, I've got to set the new environment variable. So here, this is the JST agent, the Java Sensor Toolkit agent, and it's driven by this rules file, access.yaml, that I just showed you. So now let's run that application again, and you'll see we're instrumenting a few different methods here. And now we're going to use our application normally. We're just going to browse around. So I'm going to click on some pages here. I'm not really doing much, but I'm going to click on these 5 access pages, which I think are really the key here. When I click on those, we'll see here, just by clicking on them, I was able to generate an access control matrix. Now look, I've done a lot of access control checking. It's one of the things that's most difficult in application security, because to do it, you have to kind of get a whole bunch of different accounts, all with different roles. Then you have to figure out what all those roles can do. And then you have to switch roles and try to do something that, you know, role A can do from role B and from role C. It's incredibly time consuming and very difficult to get right. But what we did here in 5 seconds is we just used this application normally. And with instrumentation, we gathered exactly where all the access control checks are. So we know that page A checks for role A. Page B checks for role B. Page C checks for role C. Page D, which we hit, has no access control checks in it. That might be a flaw. Page E here has 3 separate access control checks to see if role A, role D, and role E. Now look, this might be the right access control matrix, or it might not. But it's very easy to kind of look at this and go, hey, you know, that's a problem. Like if it would be easier if this was like, this access E was like admin configuration or delete user.jsp or something, then you'd know they needed a privileged role to do that. So this is, I think, an amazing way to do access control checking, and something that you know, is really almost impossible with modern tools. We also created this test coverage matrix, which I think is really powerful. If you're a pen tester, you may be guilty of missing a lot of the application. For instance, I've just accessed this application as guest so far, but this app has a feature where I can switch users pretty easily. So I just switched to user A, and then I can click on some of these pages as user A. I'll switch to user B, and I'll just click on A. User C, click on A. User D, click on A. And I'll click on a few as user E, just so you can get a sense of what we're doing. And again, this is super fast and easy. You can see my test coverage matrix now. It's obvious what I've missed. You can see exactly what I've tested as what user and what I've not tested as each user. So particularly where you see like, hey, user B checks to see if you're in role B in this page access B. So I should really be checking access B with user B here, but you can see I haven't tested that yet. That's really dangerous. That means you're missing something kind of fundamental about this application. So for your pen testers, I encourage you, take the extra step to instrument the application before you start testing. It's like cheating. It's like having a man on the inside who's feeding you information while you're doing the testing. So very powerful. Okay, a couple other things I want to demonstrate here. I'll just do this, this sort of the kitchen sink demo that's got a whole bunch of stuff in it that we can monitor. And I'm going to use this JST all rule set. So this is kind of, again, throwing the kitchen sink at it. But now when I run this application, you know, you can see we're instrumenting a whole bunch of different methods, sockets and files and regexes and, you know, operating system commands and so on. And here we'll start this application and we'll go through and we'll click on a bunch of stuff just to gather some information here. I'm going to fill out a couple fields here. And again, hopefully you can see just how fast this really is to use. So let me go through what we just gathered. You can see here we've built our test coverage matrix. We did our access control checks. We gathered cache headers across all the different pages here so that we can verify if there, you know, if we ran our finger down the list and we saw one of these doesn't set a cache header or has some different field here, we'd know we have a problem. You can see here we gathered encryption algorithms. We've got, you know, this page has 2 different encryption algorithms in it, but we've got some weak encryption going on. So really powerful. It'd be very difficult to do that with a pen test. You can see here we've accessed some unauthorized files here. There's actually a really good example here in this XXE lesson where you can see here, this is trying to access the Etsy password file using XXE. You can hit go here and we actually, you know, successfully accessed it, but our page here can detect that access. I did this just to demonstrate the power here. We don't have to do everything by route. Here we did encryption by user. And so, you know, this guest user sees these 3, 4 different kinds of encryption. We can also gather information about just HTTP parameters. Here you can see the parameters that are accessed by the application, and you can see a list here. these may not be the same as what's exposed in the HTML. There may be hidden parameters here that as a pen tester, you have no idea about. Well, this instrumentation just quickly reveals those parameters. So you can see exactly what each page expects in terms of parameters. And then you can see which ones we've actually received so that we can, you can go back and test and see like, oh, I never tested the protocol parameter on this forward page. I don't know what it's there for, but let's go test it. And I've got a couple other things. You can see forwards. If you want to trace the code, you can see this page forwards to this page and so on. So, look, there's a lot more capability here, but I've got a limited amount of time, and I just wanted to demonstrate really the power of instrumentation for security and security testing. But as Steve Jobs would say, got one more thing here. I want to demonstrate preventing exploits using instrumentation. So you can see here's the YAML for this. It's basically a sensor in the process builder method. That's the method in Java that starts native processes. Like if you wanted to run a command shell, that's how you do it. And I want to know anytime someone tries to start a native process inside the main execution of a servlet. And if that happens, I want to throw an exception. So here it's going to say attempt to create a process builder. So let's take a look and see if we can actually stop command injection. So the first thing I'll do is I'll exploit this so you can see this. This page has a command injection problem in it, and I can just simply, oops, I'm running the one with the sensor in it right now. Hold on. So if I just run this without an instrumentation agent, we'll be able to exploit it. Just so you can see, this will start a calculator. And okay, so you can see that's clearly exploitable. So now I'm going to run with this agent that blocks command injection. And this is a tiny amount of code, by the way. So we're just going to run that same thing. We've instrumented the methods, starts up super fast. And now when we do that same thing and try and start this, you can see this sensor intervenes and it says, hey, don't do that. You're attempting to create a process builder from within the service method, and that's blocked by this rule. So this is actually really powerful. You can use this application completely normally, and you'll never notice that rule is there until you try to start that native process, and then this instrumentation will intervene. By the way, we also log it. We'll show you exactly what line of code that's on, exactly what the native command was that was trying to be launched. You can see in this case, it's trying to open calculator. So that's Jeff, pretty cool. Let's take a look at another one here.
Jeff.
There's an expression language injection.
Jeff, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I've got a question for you.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can you please discuss how this methodology fits as a broader part of an appsec program? And what does this approach supplement or replace? So a bit of a two-part question there.
Yeah, that's great. And I've got some slides on that. I just want to, I kind of want to really get people to understand the power of instrumentation. And then I'm going to put it all together and talk to you exactly about how that fits in, okay?
Cool.
This is the last demonstration I want to show, and I just want to show this this expression language injection vulnerability, because I think this is, as I mentioned at the top, this is one of the most important vulnerabilities out there. It's we've seen a dramatic increase in expression language attacks over the last 2 months, and so what we're going to do is we're going to sandbox it. You can still evaluate an expression, but this sensor is going to prevent native processes and sockets from being created inside an expression as it's being evaluated. So this is a powerful way to prevent the harmful effects of a vulnerable application. So let's take a look at this. I've set to use this, this expression language injection rule set, and we'll start this application. And we're going to go back to this. I'm going to go to the expression language page here. And we can evaluate an expression here. You can see I'm going to evaluate, I'll put in a bigger number here. You can evaluate this expression. So we're clearly, this expression is coming from user data and it's being evaluated. But what if I want to put in something harmful and take over this, this application? I'll put in something here, like something like a runtime.exec, open the calculator. Without this instrumentation in place, this would have worked. But with the instrumentation in place, you can see the sensor blocks that expression from being evaluated because it's trying to do something dangerous. And you can see it's trying to call runtime.exec here. And that's where this sensor fired and says, hey, you can't call runtime.exec from within an exception. That's illegal. So there's no downside to running with this, this agent on all the time. And I think you should have this kind of instrumentation in your applications all the time to protect you against the harmful effects of some of these serious attacks. Okay, so that's that demonstration. So now let me try to start zooming out slowly. So the two techniques that we've talked about have names. The first is called IAST. That stands for Interactive Application Security Testing. And all that means is use instrumentation to detect vulnerabilities. That's it. That's what IAST is. And it's quite popular. Contrast has been selling IAST tools for over 5 years. There are hundreds of thousands of applications. We're in 10 of the top 25 financials and so on. It works differently than SAST or DEST. Like IAST watches the application run, and when it sees the vulnerability actually occur in an application, that's when it reports it. So we're directly measuring the running application. That's why it's more accurate. And as we'll see, that accuracy is critical to scaling application security. Now, the other piece of this is called RASP. That's Runtime Application Self-Protection. And all RASP is using instrumentation to detect attacks and prevent vulnerabilities from being exploited. That's it. In fact, they're oftentimes in the same agent. It's one agent that does both IAST and RASP, and it might analyze libraries as well. So you can do a lot with these instrumentation agents. And the reason that RASP is so much more powerful than like a WAF is, again, because of accuracy. A WAF has to be at the perimeter, and all it can see is the HTTP. And so it doesn't really have enough information to accurately diagnose an attack. Whereas here, you can see RASP can watch this data flow through the application, get into, say, a SQL query, and we can test to see, hey, did that data modify the meaning of the SQL query? If it did, that's SQL injection, because that's the definition of SQL injection. That should never happen from a legitimate user. So that's when we can intervene and block this attack with RASP. So I just believe that security works better from inside out. Historically, we've done all our security from the outside in. Scanners scan from the outside. Static tools just analyze the source code. They don't have the full context. Firewalls protect at the perimeter, and they just don't have enough information. I believe the future of security is to be integrated directly into the thing that's being monitored. And it's not just at the application layer. At the application layer, we call it IAST and RASP. But at the container layer, there are plugins that you can use, things like Twistlock and Aqua. At the host layer, there's products like Carbon Black and so on that integrate into those layers as well. Cloud has products that are integrated right into that. And the point is, you're doing the security directly from within the thing that's being monitored for security. That's how you get accuracy. The idea, in the old days, the perimeter was kind of the most efficient place to do this, one central place, but that just isn't true anymore. The networks are so complicated and applications are all over the place. It's much easier actually to just include, say, an IAST and RASP sensor in your application wherever it goes. You don't care if you deploy it to the cloud, deploy it to container, scalable, elastic environment, it doesn't matter. It's the security is part of the application because you've instrumented it in. Okay, so I just wanted to mention, this isn't as relevant for you all, but IAST and RASP are both standardized now. They're part of the US standards for security, NIST 853. They're part of the PCI standard for cardholder data protection. So, lots of organizations are using these now. Okay, so let me sum up. So doing security the traditional way keeps developers and security apart. Every time you change the code, you have to run SAS tools and SCA tools that are noisy. They produce a lot of data, some PDF report that you push onto the developers, and you create this huge backlog. Then you probably have to do that additional times in the rest of the pipeline. You're going to run SAS tools in your CI/CD in your test environment. You're going to have to track those vulnerabilities and correlate them. If you run DAST, you've got to mix those in. If you run WAF, you've got some attack data, and all this takes human experts to deal with. And ultimately, it slows down the pipeline to a trickle, and you're not delivering value to customers faster. So I'm suggesting a different approach here. I'm suggesting we analyze the whole application as it's all the way put together, not just the custom code in the libraries, but really the whole stack. We'll use instrumentation to make those applications essentially self-testing and self-protecting. And then in development, developers can get instant feedback on the code that they're writing. They can get vulnerabilities in stride and fix them immediately. So they can get feedback in like a second and fix it the way they fix every other kind of bug. And then we can repeat that instrumentation through the rest of the pipeline. So we get this real-time telemetry. We can do it again in CI/CD. We can fail the builds in, we can do test again in, test stages. And then we also get telemetry on attack so that we can really see what's going on and use that to prioritize our security efforts accurately. And ultimately, we can do all this without slowing down the pipeline. We're delivering value to customers fast. That's the essence of DevSecOps in my mind. That's the value that we can bring and how we change application security forever. Ultimately, I think application security is not hopeless, even though we've struggled for 30 years. I'm not saying that technology alone can solve security issues either. Good security requires the right mix of culture and people and process and technology. But I do believe that security instrumentation can create a platform where development and security can finally work together. You can collaborate on the rules. By using instrumentation to turn security into code, we can actually then get that code into the applications and start it running. So we can get automated testing, we can get automated protection against exploits into production applications, and ultimately that will allow us to deliver value to customers faster. So I wanted to spend just a second on this. If you're interested in trying security instrumentation on your apps, I'm proud to tell you there's over 2,500 organizations that are using Contrast Community Edition. It's totally free and full strength for one application. For .NET and Java applications, we're going to be adding Node and Python and Ruby and the other languages that we support in the commercial product soon. But if you're a small company that just has one app, you should do this immediately. Add Contrast to your application and start getting all this telemetry. It's got RASP, so you can protect your applications and see who's attacking you. It's got full IAST in it so that you can see where your vulnerabilities are. And it also analyzes all your open source code so you can see where you might have vulnerabilities there. So please give it a try. If you like it, please reach out. Give me your feedback. I'd love to hear that. And again, if you have questions, I'd love to take them now, or you can reach out to me on Twitter at Planet Level or on LinkedIn. So let me see if I can. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I've got a couple of questions. Do you want to take them now, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah, cool. So we had the one around discussing how this methodology fits as a broader part of the AppSec program, and we covered that one, I believe. We then have what is the competitive dynamic for Contrast?
So I'm not sure exactly what's that asking, but we do have some competitors. I think we're the only platform that has all three pieces put together, IAST, SCA, and RASP in a single instrumentation-based platform. But there are some other companies that are doing IAST, and I think they're responding to our success there. So we're definitely the leader in that space. And there's some other companies that are doing RASP. Imperva has a RASP that they acquired. There's another couple of small companies that are doing RASP, but I really believe that this is the future of application security. It just makes too much sense to me.
And we have another question. Actually, let me just check the Q&A quickly. Okay, so we have GitHub or GitLab.
Oh, it's a good question. Not sure exactly what they're talking about. So GitHub and GitLab have both introduced some level of security testing recently. They may be talking about the tool that I demonstrated, and I'll be open sourcing that shortly. It's I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I want to make sure it's right before I release. But maybe I should just release early and do the DevOps thing and iterate a lot.
Yeah, I'm just asking the question.
Oh, great! Yeah. So the person that asked that question says, "Yes, I'd love to help with the code." That's what I meant. So yeah, that's great. I will reach out to you, or actually, if you connect with me, I'll reach out and talk about how we go about doing that.
And what is the lead time and effort required to implement into an application with, say, 50 pages?
Well, to use a pre-built instrumentation agent like Contrast, the time is trivial. It's you just add the Java agent flag and specify contrast.jar, and then you're up and running with the agent. So it's the time to get it started is really quick, and the number of pages doesn't really matter. It's really more about just getting it into the baseline. And I think the most scalable way to do it is to actually make Contrast part of your standard application server. However you build that. If it's Docker, that's fine. If it's if it's Ansible, or you have a gold build of your server or whatever, just add Contrast in there. So it's just automatically part of, oops, just take my mic. It's automatically part of your environments wherever.
Sure. And I believe it's a kind of a follow-up and for ASP.NET.
Yeah. So our .NET agent supports .NET apps of all varieties, including ASP.NET.
Okay, and then we have a couple more. So what are your thoughts on SAST and DAST longer term and the evolution there?
Yeah, so there are things that SAST can do well. It's pretty good at identifying things that are kind of hard-coded in an application. So, like hard-coded passwords and weak encryption algorithms and things like that. It's much less good at things like data flow and, analyzing backend connections and config files and things like that. So I think there's a role for SAST and DAST, but it's largely for security experts to use as part of their research. I don't think it works to push SAST and DAST down onto development teams. Some people might call that shifting left. I call it shitting left, because it's just pushing a ton of work on developers that they don't really have the skills to do that stuff.
And what about false positives and false negative rates? How can developers mark something like a dynamic SQL query, which is necessary sometimes, and is safe if it contains no user input as an allowed method?
Yeah, for sure. So the agent I showed was simply detecting any query that uses an unparameterized statement. But I was just going to show you here quickly. There's a project at OWASP called the OWASP Benchmark Project. And you can see here the sort of false positive and true positive rates for different kinds of tools. You can see here that none of the SAST and DAST tools really do particularly well against this. You can see the versions, these are pretty recent. And IAST does much, much better. Not that this is a particularly hard test, but it aces an easy test. And you can drill into these if you look at something like IBM AppScan source, you can see where they're strong and where they're weak. Different tools have different profiles. You can see Veracode here is much different. But see, like a lot of these, these important ones, FA, D, and E are SQL injection, command injection, LDAP injection, and path traversal. These are all, 60, 70% false positive rate against the benchmark. That's not good enough. So, I think tools like Contrast, you can see really powerful results here, finishes in 30 seconds. These other tools take hours and so on. So, in terms of false positives, I think it's one of the major reasons why I thought that instrumentation was the right path forward and why I founded Contrast.
And then just the last one, it's a combination. So what's the biggest threat you ever noticed? And what would you suggest to someone wanting to get into the cyber field from a technical field?
Is that the biggest risk I ever noticed?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I've found, I don't know, thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities. I was a consultant in this space for 10 years, 15 years. I think one really bad one was it was in a major government travel system that processed billions and billions of dollars every year. And they had a very complicated certificate-based authentication system. And I thought, when I first saw it, I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to be able to bypass this. You had to have a certificate loaded in your browser and a plugin and all this crap. And after a day or two of just watching the traffic go back and forth, I realized that there was a way to inject a LDAP distinguished name into the protocol, and I could assume anybody's identity. It didn't have to have the certificate, and so I became admin on the system that way, and completely took it over. So that was a pretty big one, but it was really it took a lot of patience and a lot of hard work to figure out how to get in there. And the last question about how do I become how do I get into the cyber field? I just wanted to point you to this article I wrote called I Want to Become a Penetration Tester. I wrote this a few years ago after 15 years of hiring hundreds of pen testers and working in this field for a long time. I thought I had some value to add, and it might not be exactly what you expect. I think the right thing to do is to really learn some, a small range of technical things. Like you could get really good at testing SQL injection and XSC and CSRF, and then you could be really valuable. And then sort of in an agile fashion, expand on the things that you really understand fully and work your way to expertise in this space. Certainly you can start with tools like WebGoat and get a lot of hands-on practice, but don't just learn these things in theory, because vulnerabilities that you understand in theory, you don't understand at all. You have to go exploit them. So go back and, reenact the Equifax breach. Make sure you can exploit it all the way, and, get deep in this space. It's a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be a really important career for the next, foreseeable future, 20, 30 years, easy. We're not going to get good at writing secure code very quickly. So I think there's, it's a lot of really good, valuable work. You can feel good about yourself when you go home at the end of the day, because you made the world a safer place.
Awesome. I think we're all out of questions now, Jeff. So I just want to thank you very much for coming. Oh, hold on. Oh, yeah, this is actually a question that needs to be asked. Is it easier to test a REST API to ensure there are no security issues, or test the front-end code that uses the REST API?
Well, it's very difficult to test APIs. Almost all the applications we see, the new development that we see, is APIs. It's rich front end and then APIs on the server side. And so it's actually really important that you get good at testing APIs. They're kind of resistant to DAST because they're hard to invoke. They're a little resistant to static because the frameworks that they use are so difficult. The good news is instrumentation works on APIs really well. So I think the answer is, you should instrument your APIs and then use the front end. Normally, the front end will generate legitimate traffic to the APIs and exercise the APIs for you so that then you can get great security testing on the APIs. So, I think it's kind of a combination of the front end and the back end, but you got to test the APIs because they're really powerful. They're actually closer to the data than, traditional web apps. And so a vulnerability in one, like if you forget an access control check in one of your APIs, you could get really badly hurt.
Yeah, and then just to follow up to that is finally we are starting a new application in Clojure running on a JVM. Could we test this?
You can write security instrumentation for anything that runs on the JVM, including Clojure. But
is that how you say it? Clojure. Yeah.
We don't have rules built for Clojure yet. So you might be able to find some things where your Clojure app uses, normal libraries. Maybe you use a Java encryption library. Contrast would report that. But you'd probably have to build some custom rules to teach Contrast or any other instrumentation about exactly what to look for in a Clojure app. It's not hard. It just, it's a little bit of research to figure out, how does it actually go?
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to have you back. And I hope that the next time that we can do it in person and we can share a beer and a pizza whilst doing it.
Sounds good.
If you have a second, I hate to leave people unanswered. The very last question is, what happens if there are no rules yet? False negatives, RASP will allow the attacks to happen? Question mark.
Well, I guess, RASP, oh, you mean in Clojure? Like in the applications we support, Contrast comes with a full rule set. So, it would enforce all of those. And it's powerful, a single rule for SQL injection blocks, all different types of SQL injection, blind SQL injection, a whole bunch of different things. So you don't have to have a ton of specific rules, but, if you make your own agent, it's only going to protect you for the things, for the rules that you put in. Not sure I completely answered that, but I did see a quick question on the slides, and I'm happy to make the slides available. If for some reason you can't get them, please reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, no problem. We'll distribute them to everyone on the Meetup group and to any emails that registered for the Zoom as well. So again, thank you very much, Jeff. Really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we've got you back in London soon.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate the time today.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. We have another meetup coming in, I believe it's 3 weeks time, 2 weeks time now, 16th of July. It will be with Jeff White, the cybercrime journalist. We're going to be presenting with Ping Identity, Radware, and Checkpoint on cybercrime during the COVID era. And Jeff White's also going to take us through his story. He tracked down the person who created the love bug virus 20 years ago, and he's written a book on it. If you attend, you get a lovely free copy of his new book. So please head over to the Meetup group, sign up, and we'll see you there. Other than that, please stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.